Hi, I'm here with Scott Robinson, Director of Digital Learning and Design at Portland State University. Scott, welcome.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
Great. So I wanted to start by just asking you a quick question. I noticed on your website that the primary question of your job is there a difference between students passively receiving information from the professor and actively participating in the creation of knowledge? Um, is there any argument that no, there is not a difference?
Well, traditionally, no, right? Like
Mhm.
traditionally, for the last few hundred years or more, uh, information was kind of tightly held by those in the know and was disseminated out to those not in the know, students. Uh, and that 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 has been a very long standing and rich tradition for many, many, many years, where information is disseminated to students who don't have access to that knowledge for whatever reason
Mhm.
and are asked to, in many cases, recite the information back to the teacher, and how well they regurgitate that information is somehow a reflection of how well they, quote, learned.
Mhm.
And uh, I think what we've seen in the last maybe 10 or more years is that, well, probably even going back to imagine the dawning of the internet,
Mhm.
um, when information became much more freely available, and there were no longer these towers of knowledge that people had to go to get information, but information became much more accessible and freely available. Um, and that's not only, I mean, over the last 10 or so years, the rapidity, the speed of the access to information has only increased exponentially,
Mhm.
probably. And so there is a shift in education to some extent, from professors or teachers as the keepers of knowledge and disseminators of knowledge to students who can attend institutions of learning, to more of a students as participants or collaborators or creators of knowledge in educational institutions. And, we could spend the whole time talking about that, but the open education movement is a very good example of how information is being shared rather than shared more widely, and is more accessible than the silos of information or people with information who spread the knowledge, so to speak.
Yeah, so I have a couple follow-up questions there. My first one is, what have you found in the last 10 years is the difference for students when you actually involve them more in the learning process? Are you seeing it in better outcomes? Are you seeing it in better enrollment? Are you seeing it in just better reported satisfaction or better learning, I guess, on the student side? Or what have you noticed is the difference about bringing students into the process more?
I would say in general, when it's done well, and both the institution, or at least the instructor, the professor, the teacher, is on board with this shift, as well as the students, because they've been conditioned from a very early age to fall into these traditional roles in their relation to information. So I would say, if people agree to cooperate or coordinate or collaborate in this kind of shift, then yes, I would say, like, across the board, it's better for everyone. It's better for the teachers. It's better for the students. It's better for graduation. It's better for enroll. It's better for all those kinds of things.
Mhm.
On a grand scale, right? On a on an individual scale, an individual level, I think the draw is that this shift in the model creates tremendous more amount of agency for the students to be in control to some extent of their education.
Mhm.
And when they have that element of control or agency, it tends to increase their motivation. It tends to increase the relevancy of their own education, to what they want to do, like to their careers, ultimately, because it's no longer information being forced on them that they're required to respond or return to the instructor. It's how can I better understand something that I feel is relevant to me, so that my learning, my education, my degree means more to me than just an institution saying I got a certain grade. And so I think that's really the bigger shifting point from individual students' perspectives.
Yeah. I think that what you're talking about, this idea of students building some of that knowledge themselves, it came to K-12 a little bit before it's coming to higher ed. And I'm imagining that it's even harder to bring it from higher ed into like fully digital online learning. What does it look like in an online learning setting? I'm asking because what you're describing in my head, I'm picturing students working together. I'm picturing it in person too. What does it look like to be able to have students active participants in creating their own knowledge in a digital setting?
Yeah, and and this goes back to this dichotomy, long-standing dichotomy between online learning or distance education and more traditional in person. And it's still, oddly, in a digital age, we still make these distinctions between, oh, that's an online course or an online program or an online degree, and this is a regular normal degree, which is the in-person on campus traditional, and we still make this weird kind of distinction between the two, even though they're really not. Yes, they may look different,
Mhm.
but that same level of engagement, of inviting the students into being participatory and being uh you know creators of knowledge versus the recipients, filling the empty bucket, so to speak, filling their brains with not, like, if I could change one thing in higher education, it would be to eliminate that dichotomy between what does it look like in online and what does it look like in face to face. Because even within face to face courses, that process can look very different, right?
Mhm.
So, yes, it does look different, but it's not just because it's online versus it's in person. It's really just the environment, the tools, the 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 timing, all the different things that vary across a whole range of modalities. And we could go into like design principles and things like that, and how we try and get at pieces and identify things that are more effective in certain modalities. But if I could just say, like, let's not talk about online versus in person. Let's talk about helping students be more involved in the course itself, whatever that course might be. And there's lots of different ways to go at that. Um, but yeah, and it doesn't really matter what the modalities. We're talking about engaging students. We're talking about helping them have choice and agency in the course, helping them get access to information in multiple modalities, helping them uh, uh, demonstrate their learning in a multiple modalities, not just like you have to write a 10-page paper. Like, all of these things, regardless of the course modality, bring the student into the conversation, bring the student's interest in, and um, helping make the learning experience more relevant to them. And I think
Mhm.
that, like, really bolsters the value and in the meaning of learning much more so than, the modality, the course modality.
Yeah. So I know you've also been a big advocate for using open educational resources as a way of bringing students into the learning process. I was wondering if you could tell me a little bit about what do you find to be inherently different between using an open source resource versus like a more traditional gated textbook? And how does it actually bring students into the process more?
Well, if you ask students, they would say the cost, right? They would say like, this is just it's another barrier, another hurdle to my education. It's another gate to information. These are publisher textbooks, very large corporations that only a few of them own, the majority of all the textbooks. Like it's a corporate environment, right? When we get down to it. And it for multiple reasons. I mean, it's historical, it's capitalism, it's all, lots of different reasons why it has worked more or less for so many years. Again, the shift to more open textbooks or open education, open pedagogies is really taking the authority away from a corporation that is selling information and putting it in the hands of the classroom. So the participants in the classroom, the teachers and the students, and saying like, here's the current landscape for this subject in this class, in this textbook or collection of resources. We all have the ability to not only learn content, but we can help shape that content. And so that participatory piece is what has been missing and still is missing from the corporate model. And that throughout the course of during a class, students can contribute to the body of knowledge for that class. So what we foster or what we try and facilitate with instructors who have adopted or adapted open textbooks is to reiterate and train and help them understand and give them the tools to allow them to have students create or question or contribute things that expands that body of knowledge. A good kind of traditional example of this in open pedagogy is creating assignments that don't end up in the trash, right? Like, so through regurgitation of knowledge, the students create something and send it back to the professor. The professor's like, you learned so much, that's awesome, here's your grade, and your assignment goes in the trash, never to be seen again. That's the transactional model, the very historical transactional model. Whereas compared to an open education model or open pedagogy model, they're creating something that is persistent in some ways for those students. Maybe it's a portfolio or something that they're going to use to further or get a career, get a job. Or it's actually contributing to, say, that textbook, that open textbook, where students are writing articles or editing past students' work, creating blogs or things that live on beyond just that assignment. And that kind of encapsulates that major shift in the roles in the classroom.
So if I'm understanding this correctly, even if I won the lottery and were able to give all of your students a traditional textbook for free, you would still choose the open source one because they're able to add to it, they're able to collaborate on it and kind of leave that for the next students that are going to get it next.
Yeah, the price tag is really kind of just the icing on the cake, and that's what makes the news. Students save so much money by, using open textbooks, and that's all good. And it's super important because it is a real barrier, and students worry about paying for textbooks more than they worry about paying for tuition. So cost is front and center in a lot of people's minds, and especially for students. But the transformational component is only available when we're shifting from strictly copyrighted publisher content to open content. Yeah.
Yeah. So, one question that I have on that for you, coming from the institutional perspective, I know that a lot of times institutions tend to feel that the content is the service that they are providing. So, a lot of times it's gated, it's protected. I know there are all those concerns about, like, I don't want an AI model pulling from my content because it's my content. How do you think that changing to an open source model kind of changes the role of the institution and of the faculty member in the learning process if they're no longer the ones providing and gating the content?
Yeah, and there are still uh, lots of people concerned with, you know, institutions, but specifically faculty concerned about my courses or my content
Mhm.
or, um, kind of that gatekeeper mentality, uh, which I think in a lot of ways is just traditional and historical. But I think either at institutional, but probably more frequently at individual instructor level, we're seeing more change there. So it may not be ubiquitous across the university or even across a degree, but specific individuals or maybe programs, there's been more of a, for people that have tried this, there has been more of an intentional kind of like, yeah, I don't have all the answers. I don't own all the answers or the information. This is really we're all learning together to some extent. The students are obviously learning, but the professor, the instructor is also learning. Like this is a whole it's a completely different mindset.
Mhm.
So yes, there is there's some level of getting used to, or in fact giving up our reins on information. It's just odd that it's taking this long when the information is so freely available. Uh, but I think in pockets, whether it's within institutions or entire institutions, we're seeing these shifts from you can go anywhere and learn anything for free. Like you can go on YouTube and just you can figure anything out. And so it's no longer the information that
Mhm.
is the service, it's the facilitation. It's a shift in the role of the instructor from dispenser of information to facilitator of learning. And that's gut wrenching for a lot of people who just want to disseminate information and who are very good at it. But we could get that same information for free anywhere. So, what are students paying for? They're no longer paying for the information. They're paying for the facilitator. They're paying for the support. They're paying for the collaboration. They're paying for the network. They're paying for, all of these things that make learning or make an institution a good environment for learning, and learning that is relevant to the student and not just something that comes out of a fixed, relatively fixed textbook that's updated every couple of years by a publisher.
Yeah, I agree with you that it's become a lot easier to learn things outside of a classroom. It's become a lot easier to learn a job on the job, even with all of the other resources that you have. And that shift happened way faster than higher ed institutions can adapt to it. Do you think that all of those changes have changed the need even for the traditional 4-year degree? And how would you like to see a higher ed institution kind of adapt in response?
Um, yes, I think there are many, many more ways to learn something, and it's just the scale at what you want to learn. Like, if I need to fix a bicycle tire, I'm probably not going to enroll in a class to do that today.
Mhm.
But 20 years ago, I may have gone down to the bike shop and sat in on a informal class about bike maintenance.
Uh-huh.
And then maybe I even would have paid for it because it would have been worth the knowledge and skill. But I now today I realize that information is out there. I have access to it through the internet. I can go to a YouTube video and in 10 minutes I can get that skill. So in some ways, it's a matter of scale, and you're hearing lots of talk about certificates,
Mhm.
credentials, micro credentials, micro learning. And institutions are starting to understand that maybe a 4-year degree isn't the package that students need. Maybe they do need to upskill a little bit, and maybe it's one or two or a handful of classes. Maybe that results in a certificate. Maybe it's a stack of micro credentials. So their
Mhm.
institutions are very much interested in how they can repackage the standard semester into more applicable, usable, relevant, um, timely resources that are not only have a maybe a quicker return on investment for the student, but also more affordable. And so, yeah, I mean, with Coursera and um, similar with Google's certificates, like there's so many different ways to go after some component of learning. It's really just a matter of scale now.
Mm.
What are you looking for to do what you want to do? And connecting the students with the right training, with the right education, with the right program, with the right degree, whatever that looks like. Because the one size fits all, it's been a 2-year degree or a 4-year degree for a long time, theoretically. That isn't necessarily the model that's going to fit the majority of students anymore today. Yeah.
Yeah. So let's say we, in the next 5 to 10 years, are able to move to a place where there are more things that are open source. There are fewer instructors or institutions kind of gating some of the knowledge. There are these like stackable micro credentials. Do you think that there's anything that we would be losing from the way that things have traditionally being done that we should make sure to not lose in that transition?
Yeah, unfortunately, well, or fortunately, by definition, when we start chopping up, say, a 4-year degree, or maybe it's a 6-year degree these days, uh, when we start chopping these things up into smaller pieces, by definition, we're going to lose things. And again, the question is, what is the student looking for? Even if we go back to thinking like, when I was in college, I went to school full time. I didn't have any job, right? Or I had maybe a part time job. I didn't have, so I was a very traditional residential, privileged, liberal arts college experience, right? And it was it was what probably half of the experience was more than the classes or more than the education, right? And so by default, as you start chunking those things up or breaking that educational experience up, you're going to lose things like, living on campus or living in a community of peers or um, extracurricular events. It's less a matter of like what is lost, and it's more about what are your goals and what is your pathway to get there, right? I can't necessarily say like, well, if we do this new model, then we need to force in these other things because it was part of the tradition and we knew that it was important then, and so it should be important now. I'm not saying those are and aren't those things that maybe don't fit in are or aren't important, but it's just a matter of there are characteristics associated with the type of learning that you want to engage with to meet some goal. And are there support services we want to include in all of learning? Sure. I mean, do we want students to feel like there are people that they can reach out to regardless of the scale of their learning or the timing? Yeah, yeah, sure. But by definition, by not living on campus for 4 years, I'm just gonna have a different experience than
Mhm.
someone getting a micro credential.
Yeah. So I want to talk a little bit about kind of like your vision of all of this too. Do you have even like a 3 to 5 year vision of what you would like digital learning or in-person learning? I'm going to say learning in general so that we don't have that dichotomy. and kind of what you would like to move towards in the next couple of years at Portland State University.
Well, I can speak, just to Portland State. That's someplace I can have an impact. I think continuing to decrease or eliminate unnecessary barriers toward accessing education is like the thing that keeps me going. As we continue to think about like what are the things that are stopping people from accessing education in in a formal institution like Portland State. Obviously, cost is a big one, which we have a reasonable tuition, and it is what it is. And we have a lot of financial aid, so um, that's the obvious one. But increasingly, students are getting older. They have much more complicated lives. They have multiple jobs. They have families. They have dependents. There's healthcare, like there's food, there's housing, like so. The barriers are not necessarily directly associated with the university, but the university can do a lot to address those barriers. I think that is like a main goal of mine, is to continue to work on increasing access to education at Portland State University. And I think in my role, looking at access to education through a variety of modalities, a variety of course modalities, a variety of course content and assessment, all those things, like giving students agency around accessing those courses, the modality of those courses, the flexibility within the courses for accessing information in the courses, providing evidence of their learning in the courses. All of those things really makes a big difference for a growing percentage of our student population. Every time we put up a hard deadline or a hard assessment or a hard program requirement or a hard graduation requirement, every time we put up these barriers, we're losing a few or causing them to extend their degree so that it costs them more money rather than getting into a career. I think we are in a fairly unique position, maybe a little bit more progressive, in thinking about all these different ways that we can break down some of these walls, even within the institution, that are very traditional among other institutions in the US, and not only attract students, but retain and help them graduate on time.
The way that I'm envisioning what you're saying is almost taking what you have right now and turning it into building blocks so that students can kind of have more flexibility, grab what they need in order to get where they're going. And I guess if you're also working with a slightly older population, they probably are more able to handle that than if you're working with all people fresh out of high school who might need a little bit more structure. Well, that is really exciting. Do you have any big plans right now for how you want to do all of that?
Well, we can stick with the kind of the online space for a moment. Many other institutions have almost separate organizational structures for administering and teaching and enrolling online students in a relatively, we'll say, mostly fully online experience. And so students are enrolled as online students. They may be taught by online instructors. They may have separate online fees, tuition, and so on. And so whether it's an e-campus, or oftentimes they're still associated with the institution, but they're almost run as separate entities, more or less. But at Portland State, we don't do any of that. We don't enroll online students. We don't have online instructors. Our office doesn't just support online instructors. We support all instructors of all courses across the entire campus. And so the tricky thing is that students can take online courses. They could take all online courses if they work that up. They could take all in-person courses. They can take in-person and online courses and flip flop back and forth. there's a huge amount of administrative and strategic and coordinating that goes on behind the scenes. But the goal is, if a student needs to take an online course or needs to take an in-person course, they can find, hopefully, they can find the course that fits their needs for that particular term, as opposed to waiting to the next term or waiting to the next year. And that, you know, and this ends up, the domino effect is that they end up spending, you know, their time inefficiently and end up spending more money to get the same degree than if they had more choice, more flexibility. So focusing, you know, that's one way the university, and particularly in my position, one way we can move the needle a little bit on that that flexibility and giving students choice and allow them to move around campus and off campus and back on campus. Still having some of that on-campus experience if they want, but having the flexibility to be completely online if they want as well.
Well, Scott, thank you so much. I'm so excited to hear about all the flexibility that y'all are providing to your students of Portland State. It sounds like it must make it so much more accessible for all of the learners that are trying to learn there. If anybody would like to hear more about what you're doing, where can they go to learn more?
Yeah, we have a really great website on our campus for our office that provides a lot of information for instructors primarily. We're a faculty support office, but we're finding through our data analytics that we're getting a tremendous amount of traffic from institutions, from other institutions across the country and the globe looking for our resources. So yeah, it's just pdx.edu/OAI is our website.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure.